Welcome, everyone. My name is Hend Azrayer, and I'll be your host today. At Product Manager HQ, we're having these live events, live Q&A events, where we're interviewing product leaders and asking how they broke into tech or product management and answering some questions about what lessons and tips and strategies that they have for us. Today, we are very excited to have Philip Huibonhoa, who is currently VP of Product and Engineering at Enjoy Inc. He's a co founder with more than 15 years of experience in startups. Thank you, Philippe, for your time and just sharing your journey with us.
It's my pleasure to join you. Thank you, Hend.
Thank you. And we are live, and anyone who has questions, feel free to just type them in the chat and we'll make time to answer your questions. Philippe, you were a co founder very early in your career. You graduated from college and you started your own company right after graduating engineering school. Can you describe the ways your startup helped you develop product management foundation skills? And what lessons can you share from that experience?
Yeah, I'll say the young and naive years of co-founding a startup. I think those were some of the most dense years in my career, and I'll say dense just because there's a lot of lessons and learnings and um, to be had. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's very true. You wear many hats, but you also get a lot of responsibility and autonomy and influence, and I think that's ultimately where I did get a taste for product management. And I was lucky enough to work with some really smart, passionate people. So over the course of many years, I developed, I think I'll say a handful of what I think are deeply rooted lessons to me. And I say deeply rooted because I think of these principles as ones that sort of affect all aspects of being a product manager or anyone in sort of a role in a startup or a business. They can affect culture, org design, execution strategy, managing up and down. Uh, and so I definitely want to touch upon those, but maybe I'll start with probably my favorite um, and most illustrative product problem we ran into. And I want people to kind of mull it over as I talk through some of the learnings, and then we'll circle back and talk about what actually happened when we ran into this. Um, and so the problem was we were a ed tech startup in a sort of B2B environment, and over the course of 6 months, all our customers were really asking for different reporting features, and reporting was something we didn't have at all. Um, it wasn't a core competency, but some customers were asking for things like charting, like can we chart some certain data? Others were asking for slicing and dicing other sets of data. Others were literally saying, "Oh, pivot table, just give us a pivot table." um, and if you took all those requests at face value, that would probably be, half a year of engineering to build it all. So as we talk through some of the lessons, I would love for everyone to kind of just think in the back of their head, like, what's the right way to approach that? How would you approach that? And then I can talk about how some of these lessons really were shaped and how I was shaped by how we approach this and what we learned. But sort of back to your question, wore many hats. Back then there wasn't really product management wasn't defined. It wasn't as big a thing as it is today. There wasn't all the services you have today. We didn't have AWS. We had to run our own servers. So I had to do lots of different things from customer support to shipping, receiving, SEO, pricing, business model. We were really just trying to make the business work. And that's ultimately what product is about. And as we grew, I became really fascinated with good decision making, how to make responsible decisions, and that's really how I kind of got into product management. So, you fast forward to today, and I talk to a lot of product folks, from CPOs to new product managers or engineers or designers wanting to break into product management. And I think everyone still faces to some degree, I think product is still relatively new in their companies wanting to affect their culture, create some product transformation, get their organizations to be more product driven, even explain what product management is. And that's been a huge part of my career as well, just being part of that conversation. And
Yeah.
and and like I've had to learn from the ground up, and I think that's the best way is to take everyone through that journey. What is product management? How has it evolved in startups? In the same way, engineering has been, like engineering has had a journey from waterfall to agile and all the things that go along with that. Um, and if you don't mind, I pulled some slides from a deck I used to talk about some of that journey. I think that would be kind of helpful and interesting, and it'll let me touch upon some of those lessons that I've learned.
Yeah, no problem. Let me get out the way.
And as questions come up, please feel free, anyone, to kind of just chat them in and interrupt. But we will, of course, circle back to some of those lessons and that example problem I gave. So, what I'll say, maybe just to start, is I have had to explain. The difference between engineering and product management, and maybe that's somewhat more obvious today, and for others like it still isn't, but I think it's good to start at the roots, like first principles, right? So at its core, engineering really is about building things the right way and sort of all the complexities that go with that, right? So then product management at its core is really about building the right thing. What gets us the most customers, what makes customers happiest, what makes us the most money, which of those to focus on. And product strategy and thinking is all about what we invest in, how much and why. And just as importantly, what we don't invest in. And there are lots of facets to that. There's a time dimension, what should you do now versus later. There's an effort dimension, what should you do, kind of a crap version of one thing, if it means you can do a slick version of something else. And if you get that backwards, it can really sink a project or a company. And I'll say what no one ever told me and what no one ever tells anyone is it's really hard because every idea can sound like a really good idea at some point. So, a winning product strategy is one that allows you to make the right decisions about what to invest in, how much to invest, and when to invest it. And that's fundamentally, the core of product management. So, I'll often talk a lot about how engineering and product have similar lines of thinking. I really do think when I started to get into product management from an engineering background, it was positioned to me like almost foreign or a distant concept. And I'll say anyone who's in that boat, like it's actually not. Like I think you take a lot of how you approach engineering problems and apply it on sort of product management. And I think that's a huge and good way to be successful. And I think it's also important for product managers to realize the thinking is the same. Um, but I'll say, we talk about decision making and applying to different axes. The most simplified way to look at things is, of course, a cost benefit. So you could plot things like a cost benefit chart, and almost literally, you can have engineering apply. Engineering traditionally is for understanding that x-axis or that cost axis, and product management is about that y-axis or the benefit. So you could plot all your opportunities if you're trying to decide what to do, and really just divide it into four quadrants. And this is a really a common way of thinking and maybe an oversimplification. But if we just go through it really quickly, some of the easy quadrants, right? The top left, these are high benefit, low cost. Of course, you'll want to do those. The bottom right, this is sort of that danger zone. It's high cost, low benefit. If you invest in that, you're wasting resources, you're creating drag on your system, you're cluttering the UI, you're wasting time for your company. It's like, who in their right mind would invest in that? Then we get a little trickier. So the bottom left is this low benefit but low cost. This work is kind of easy to justify. It doesn't take much time. That's fine. Um, but if your product strategy allows you to keep doing these, you grow into a low impact team. So that's the danger there. And then probably the one you want to be most careful about is sort of this top right, because it is high benefit, but you're investing a lot in here. And if you're trying to make any meaningful product or company, you're going to have to make investments in here. And the reason why I say it's tricky is let's just hone in on one of these. So let's just take an opportunity on that top right. Of course, it should be a slam dunk, but then you have to factor in unknowns, right? So from an engineering standpoint, if you're representing costs, it's easy to get the estimate wrong. Oh, we forgot to consider something. It was more complicated than we first thought, or it requires changes in some other system. It's easy to push that cost out. From the benefit side, if you're on the product side and you're supposed to represent that benefit, it's really hard to predict the impact of something, right? You can get the forecast wrong. You didn't have time to do an MVP. Your A/B test results were misleading. Turns out your salespeople were selling to you too. They could even do exactly what you thought, but the market or the business has changed and the impact is no longer as important. So when we said, 10 seconds ago, who in their right mind would invest on that bottom right? Well, the truth is it happens all the time, right? And to me, the first step of being able to craft a product strategy that prevents your organization from chasing these high cost, low impact opportunities is you really just need to understand the full 2D, both axes. You can't be throwing, cost over the fence to engineering and have an over the fence sort of attitude with engineering. Tell me the estimate and I'll tell you the impact and we'll go from there. So you kind of need to be able to understand and traverse both worlds. And I pulled some examples of interesting problems and things in the course of product management and its journey in startups. And I'll say like even just understanding that y-axis is really hard. So it's a tough job to be able to understand both. And one of the best examples to me of where it's really, really hard to understand and predict the benefit. So if we're just thinking of the benefit, just the product side, I think my favorite example of this is an A/B test that the Basecamp folks did on a landing page for their high-rise product. This was many years ago. And they were doing an A/B test essentially for signups. So a conversion here is a signup. And you can see on the left side, they have their original design. And on the right side, they tested a variant, which they called the long form design, which allowed them to really have a much longer page and enumerate all the benefits of their product. And if I said, guess, what the results are, well, the long form design increased signups by nearly 38% based off the controller original. So that's great. That's pretty awesome for a landing page A/B test. Then they tested another alternate, which they called the person design, and they took a real customer with real sayings about how using the product impacted the business, and they A/B tested that, and the person design increased signups from the original by almost 103%, which is huge. Now, especially if you're an engineer, because this happens in engineering all the time, if there are two really good solutions to a problem, what engineers will do all the time is, of course, they'll combine them and say, we'll get the benefits of both. So the next variant they tested was what they called a long form person design. It started with that person design at the top and then a longer page where they could include all the benefits of using their product. And if I said, hey, you're all product managers, you have experience in this field, what would you guess is the outcome of this test? And I think it's really easy to say, well, of course, well, hopefully it's going to be more than 103%. But, if we're being skeptical, it might be somewhere between the first two, between that 38 and 103% increase. Well, they tested it and they found it actually reduced conversion from the original by 23%. So the point of that is it's really, really easy to introduce what I'll call product management bugs, right? Like a bug is any time a system or something acts in a way that's not expected. And we're used to that notion in engineering, but in product management, like that's a thing, right? Like we expect this thing to do something and it might not do that. And it's really, really easy to not understand or not be able to predict what the benefit or impact of a feature or a product you're building is going to be. Even if we had like those results of those A/B tests, you would feel pretty confident, like, oh, that's going to increase it at least some amount. And I'll say for those who don't have an engineering background, like estimating costs is just as hard as estimating impact. So so it's really hard to even just plot those opportunities. And I think that's a huge reason why we do MVPs, right? A minimum viable product. I think the easiest way to explain an MVP for someone who doesn't know um, is sort of like what's the cupcake version. If you're setting out to bake a wedding cake, which is a big significant task, how do you go about it? Well, one way is sort of that waterfall way, which is you bake all the batter, you set up the cake, you make the icing, and then you ice the cake. And I think we've learned over the years so that a better way is you get to something that provides value as quick as possible. So bake a cupcake, have someone try it out. Is the cake still moist? How's the frosting taste? Then once you've gotten feedback, iterate and bake a bigger version, and then iterate until you get to the wedding cake. So I think MVPs are pretty well understood now. What I'll say is I see a lot of product managers today and teams fall on the other side, actually. They only bake cupcakes. So if you look to build something huge, impactful, or, bake a wedding cake, what I'll often find is you look under the hood and it's kind of just this Frankenstein of loosely coupled MVPs, right? And that's really dangerous too. So I think both both ends of the spectrum are dangerous. Yeah, going straight to the wedding cake and then only baking cupcakes. And so I think one of the key principles I find is think big, start small, move fast. And I think that really incorporates all the ideas of how you do things with an MVP well. So starting small, make sure you're headed in the right direction, make sure that you understand the benefit and costs well, but you still want to think big, right? You don't want your product to be some disjointed Frankenstein of just cobbled together features. And then the move fast, I'll talk a little about, but from an engineering standpoint, like every engineering team I've been a part of, we've had continuous deployment. So we'll release a dozen times a day. It's almost like the engineering version of an MVP. So you're releasing code as quick as possible in bite-sized chunks, and so you can understand the impact. I think I also have a lot of influences from lean methodology, lean product, and lean is all about eliminating waste. I think a lot of product leaders and product managers forget some of those aspects of the business. So if you want to be a successful product team and organization, I think you should take it upon yourself to look at what does it take from discovery or inception all the way to delivery. How long does that take for our product process to do that? Are there any things in there that is wasteful, that unnecessarily slows things down? How do you make that inception or discovery to delivery as fast as possible? Speed up that cycle. So I think there again, there's a lot of good corollaries between good engineering and product, and maybe we'll do sort of a couple more principles. And so think big, start small, move fast. I think that incorporates a lot of lessons and pitfalls in how you execute. But there's also, a lot of lessons about what you choose to invest in or what you choose to execute on. So if we go back to the quadrants again, and if you think about sort of that left side, that low cost stuff is very alluring to invest in. You know, things that are easy, things that are low cost. After all, sort of the risks or losses are pretty small. Product managers, I think, oh, we have space in between these two big projects. Let's just fill it with some of this, easier things to do. Engineers still, like all the time, I find, oh, like, yeah, that's easy. I'll just crank that out, right? And I think that's one of the biggest traps I've seen teams fall into. Kind of similar to sort of that cupcake, wedding cake. So if we think about it's easy, there's a fine line between saying it's easy and that's a good reason to sort of prioritize doing something you think or is a good idea already, versus saying it's easy to justify doing something that you don't know is a good idea, right? And what we just learned is it's really hard to even understand if something is a good idea or not. Like it's hard to predict what that impact is going to be. And I think that's doubly hard. What people don't understand is for low effort items, it's harder than for high effort items. With a high effort project, if you want to figure out if it's a good idea, you can spend time doing some research. It makes sense. You could do an MVP, you could do some data analysis or testing or user research. For a low effort item, it's like it's such a low effort item. How can you even MVP it? You can't. Like it's so small already. It doesn't make sense to. And that's why it's so tricky and alluring. So, but going to build something just because it's easy is like going shopping, you know, seeing something on sale like a bagel slicer. You don't need a bagel slicer. You don't want a bagel slicer. You may not even like bagels, but you buy it anyway because it's on sale. I think everyone knows someone who shops like this. I think my girlfriend is a big one who shops like this. Oh, it's on sale. That's such a great deal. We got to buy it. Well, guess what? If you buy things just because they are on sale, your house is going to be full of things you don't need or even use. And if your product strategy allows you to prioritize things just because they are easy, your product's going to be full of features that aren't valuable or used by customers. So I would say don't dilute your product. You want to keep it powerful, you want to keep it potent. And I think that's a really important lesson. And so you should always keep that in the back of your mind when you're thinking about what to do, what not to do, how to execute. Is this going to dilute our product or not? And on the cost side of things, I think lots of engineers will tell you another reason not to do something just because it's easy is just because it's easy doesn't mean it always is. I see lots of people buried with work because they committed to doing something they thought was going to be easy. Now, if you're more experienced, hopefully you can recognize this trap and take a step back and say, "Oh, let's reassess. Is this worth it? Maybe we should back out." But it's really hard. I've found myself in this trap before, all the time. If you're in the middle of it and you thought it was easy, the end always looks like it's just around the corner, but it's a moving target. And then by the time you finish, guess what? You end up doing something you probably never would have chosen to do in the first place had you known the costs up front. And then you're probably tired and exhausted trying to do all that work for something small, and then you actually have to do that large amount of work that you were supposed to have gotten started, a couple of weeks ago. It's easy is a total trap. So I'll do one more and then we can get back to some of the questions because I see some questions coming in. And this will circle back to sort of that initial problem or question I asked some folks to think about, right? Um, which is how to handle that situation where customers were asking for different aspects of that reporting feature. I'll say one of the biggest things I've learned is product managers should be highly problem oriented. They want to solve problems, not build solutions. They want to prioritize problems, not projects. They want to understand the root cause of problems customers face. The challenge is I think everyone you're going to deal with, for the most part, is not going to be problem oriented. They're going to be solution oriented. You're going to have a CEO who's going to want to build some vision that they have. You're going to have salespeople that'll be selling you on something that they probably sold customers. Customers are going to be asking you, hey, can you build a certain feature for me? That's the language everyone speaks. So the best product managers can live and interact in a solution oriented world, but still dig in and find the right problems to solve. And I have an article outlining a lot of the benefits of problem-oriented cultures and thinking, so I won't get into all those facets today. And I think you can find that link on my LinkedIn. But I do want to go over sort of this example where around discovery and prioritization and the impact of having a problem-oriented mindset, right? And so even if customers are saying, "Hey, this is the solution we want you to build. This is the feature we want you to build," the first thing you're going to want to ask yourself is, how many of our customers? Because if it's not a lot, guess what? You've just diluted your product. And even if it was every single one of your customers, right? Like in that problem, that example I said, every one of our customers was asking for some aspect of reporting. I still wouldn't say that's the best way to approach it from a product mindset sense. And a good way to sort of see that is that quote. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Now, whether Henry Ford said that or not, I'm not sure. But I think it's a good demonstration of why solution oriented mindsets or thinking is really wrong in a product world. So, how do we approach that problem where our customers were asking for different aspects of reporting? Well, I'll say probably the most naive approach from a product sense is to just take them at face value and build them as they come, right? And that might be what someone new to product management might do. It's like, oh, this customer wanted some charting, we'll build that. And then a couple months later, this customer wants some amount of slicing and dicing, we'll build that. And this customer wants some sorting or pivot table function, we'll go and build that. Maybe a little better way is you see all of those requests and you say like, oh, like this could actually be its own, wedding cake. This can be its own reporting module. I want to make sure it's a cohesive experience. Let's go and build this reporting module as a whole and go and spend the 4 to 6 months to build that. But that's still a pretty big investment. Now, what we've learned from some of those slides is, a even slightly better approach is let's go ahead and MVP it, which is what we thought. What if we just allow customers to export this data? Then they can go import it to Excel, and then they can do all the charting, slicing, and dicing that they want. We had close enough relationship, we could say like, oh, however you use that data, send it to us so we can learn. We can track how often people were exporting the data. That would be a really good way to avoid the 6 months of work with that and really validate it's worth it. And I'd say that's a pretty good approach, but that's still not what we did. So what happened is we saw these requests and we talked to the people asking for all those reporting features. And we said, why? Why do you want that? What are you going to do with it? How are you going to use it? Why is it so important? What problem are you trying to solve? Really digging in to understand that root cause. And what we found was all our customers, these bookstores, they took a huge risk going with us. We're a startup, we're new, we're not established like a Barnes and Noble, especially in higher ed, where I categorize, decision makers as very risk adverse. It was a big risk to go with us. And so they just wanted a little recognition. They wanted to show off. Look what a great decision that was. Look how much money we saved the school. Look how much money we saved students. And a lot of product, I think you'll find, is really human. There are human components and human problems driving things, right? Everyone wants to be recognized and acknowledged when they do a good job. Well, so did we. And as luck would have it, like we already were generating a lot of these reports because we were interested ourselves in knowing how much we were saving schools and how much we were saving their students. So it turns out what we did is we said, we have these reports already. We'll send them to you every quarter. And it was already formatted to highlight like how well a job we were doing, of course. Bookstores loved it. They didn't have to do any work. We barely had to do any work other than sending an email. And I think that probably solved the problem better than anything else that we could have built. Right. So I really think probably one of the most important tenets to always hold is problems, not solutions. When you're looking to build something, when you're looking to prioritize, always be looking on that problem space. Don't be thinking about prioritizing, oh, this project versus this project. Prioritize the problem that project is trying to solve. So I think that's a hopefully a good summary of some of the experiences and lessons that I found. I think I can't get to all of them, but certainly things like don't dilute your product, um, think big, start small, move fast, problems not solutions. I think these are really core tenets I've learned that sort of affect a lot of my day-to-day and week-to-week life. And every time I run into something or I don't know what to do, I always go back to these and think about how they should affect, my team or how I execute or how I work with different people.
Thank you so much for that. I second the comment that says great analogies. I really like the analogy of not buying something when it's on sale because you don't need it. That it really breaks down a lot of concepts so that we can understand it easily. I know there was a question in the comments as well by Nicholas Green. He says, for those with a non tech background wanting to move into product led product management, what do you recommend learning to help understanding with communication with dev engineers in regards to coding, languages, and other skills of the engineering team?
Yeah, I'll say the most important thing is I don't think you need to know how to code. I think that would be just a lot of work and learnings. You have engineers for a reason. I don't think you necessarily need to learn specific coding languages. What is helpful though is I think the best product managers are, I think, like a T-shaped. So they have broad knowledge over different disciplines. So I would say every good product manager, unless you're working on a only back-end product, should have some broad knowledge on what makes good UI, good UX, good engineering, right? But go deep on the product side of things. And what that means to me is what that means to me is you want to be able to empathize with engineers. So if an engineer says, "Oh, this is going to be more complex than I thought. This is going to be this. I can't give you a immediate deadline for this massive project." I think the worst reaction to that is, "Oh, that's your job. You need to do it, right?" So in the same way that you should empathize with customers, you should have that empathy with engineers and understand. I think the most important thing is understand the challenges it goes to building good software and what it means to have good software. So I think things like tech debt, things like being able to have flexibility on some of the estimates, um, things like refactoring. The best product managers who connect with engineers emphasize with those concepts And to me, probably the not so good ones, the ones that are going to probably create a divide between teams, are the ones that are like, that's your job, you deal with it. We as a business need to get this feature out. So I don't care about your tech debt. Like, is your tech debt more important than this feature? So you need to understand about what it takes to maintain a system. And then just in terms of materials, I don't know if I have like materials that are specifically tech oriented, but I do think it's really, really good for anyone trying to break into product just to have a ferocious appetite on whether it's if you like listening. I personally can't retain anything from podcasts or audiobooks, but podcasts or reading, I think there's a lot of great resources out there. Um, for design, to me, like Don't Make Me Think, The Design of Everything, Hooked, those are great fundamental books. Um, I think understanding humans is huge. So psychology and economics books applied into a business setting. So things like Thinking Fast and Slow, Mindset, Think Again, those are all how we react to new information, how you can be more convincing, whether your audience is engineering or the CEO or another product manager. Um, and then I think for those who are starting to get into leadership roles, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy is a good one. Trillion Dollar Coach is an amazing book, and Dare to Lead, I think, should just be required reading for anyone who is a manager. So I think that there's a lot of books out there, and I think the most important, like, there's no like silver bullet of like, if you read these 3 books, you're going to be amazing. I think as long as you have a ferocious appetite and are always looking to continue growing, that's the most important thing.
Thank you so much for that. I wish we had more time. Everything that you shared was wonderful. Any closing statements? Anything else that you, strategies, tips, just one last liner that you could share?
Yeah, maybe I'll. One is the most important is I think understanding if it's a really rough role to be in, product manager. Sometimes I think you get beat up from all sides, so take it with a grain of salt. Like you if you're growing, you're going to be outside your comfort zone. You might fail at things. That's all okay. The worst thing is just to not self-reflect, not learn, not adapt. You're going to fail. You're going to run into things you don't know. All of that is okay. It's how you react to it, which is always be thinking about how to improve, what you can learn from those experiences, whether they were wins or losses. I think that's probably the most important attitude. And if you have that, then I think there's no holding you back.
Yeah, thank you so much for that reminder and last note. One more question. Sammy has a question for you. Will industry be big differential to product manager role? What is the preference on industry, technology, education, e-commerce, etc.?
I don't necessarily think industry is the biggest one. I think it's going to be the culture of the other leaders on the team, in the company, right? Like you can have a really disruptive startup in any industry, but if the leaders come from a sort of non-product culture or background, you might run into a lot of challenges there where you spend a lot of time just trying to inject and change the culture versus executing within an already highly product oriented culture. So I don't think it's really industry. I think you'll want to look at sort of what the leadership team looks like, because you can have really strong product culture and product thinking in any industry. I do think things like, B2B versus B2C make huge differences in the product role. Having, a few partners versus having being able to go directly to a lot of consumers really changes how you go about your day as a product manager. So I think that's probably a bigger differentiator. And then I would look at, again, like the leadership team and the culture that they look at. I think the most important thing to remember is I like the idea of first principles, and you can apply that to culture. So if you look at the leadership team, there's going to be some principles that they really carry to heart that they're not going to change on. So if you run into a company where like the CEO has their hands in on every little project or roadmap, the question is, can you distill it down to, is he doing that because that's, or she doing that because he or she or they think it's best? Are they doing it because there's no one else to do it because they don't trust the people? Is that, is it because they think they have the most knowledge, or is that because they think that's what their role is? And depending on the answer, you might be able to change it, you might not. And if you can, it'll give you a framework to change it, right? Like, oh, you think you need to have your hands on every single design aspect of the product because that's going to result in the most impact. Well, then you can start to say, oh, like, well, let's try this where you only have limited influence on the details and you can focus on some bigger problems. Let's see what the impact of that is. So I think that those play a bigger role than industry for sure.
Thank you. Uh, well, that is the time that we have with you today. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to make those slides, presenting the way you presented, giving us analogies so we can understand, and all those lessons that you've learned within the last 15 years, 16 years, presenting everything to us today. So thank you so much. We've included how people can reach you. And thank you. Appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Hen, and thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.